This is a continuation of the video about US military campaigns. If you've not seen the initial part, we recommend watching the first video. You can find the link in the description and in the pinned commentary. The defeat of Germany in World War I led to World War II. Adolf Hitler, leader of the new state, the Third Reich, being wounded in the hospital as a soldier, promised to make revenge. Britain was the first to receive American military and economic support under the Lend-Lease system. After the Third Reich attacked its former war ally, the Soviet Union, the United States started to assist it too. So, the initial US intervention was almost the same as during World War I. Nevertheless, this time the Japanese embargo made a mistake. In retaliation for the oil embargo, Japanese aircraft attacked the United States Pacific base at Pearl Harbor and inflicted serious damage. Enraged, President Roosevelt faced Congress the next day. The US declared war on Japan. 3 days later, the US also declared war on Japan's ally, the Third Reich. The United States increased the Lend-Lease for the Soviet Union, allowing it to withstand the Third Reich's army, and struck the Japanese Empire in the Battle of the Pacific Island of Midway, destroying 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. The Pacific battles with Japan continued until almost the end of the war. In the summer of 1942, the United States sent an expeditionary force led by General Dwight Eisenhower to Africa. The Battle of El Alamein in Egypt resulted in a successful counterattack by American and British forces against German forces and prevented the conquest of North Africa. The following year, the Allies captured Tunisia and Algeria, completely stopping the Reich's troops. The result was that Italy betrayed its ally. Benito Mussolini ordered the troops to leave Africa. Thus, the Third Reich in Africa was left alone against the US and Britain. However, Mussolini's attempts to escape were not successful. In the same year, the United States and the United Kingdom conducted Operation Husky. Despite the bloody fighting, the capture of Italy began from Sicily. The Italian and Albanian King Victor Emmanuel III, whose title became formal during Mussolini's reign, signed an act of surrender. Mussolini was arrested. However, the Third Reich was still active in Italy. After the success of the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front, the Tehran Conference between the leaders of the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom was organized at the end of the year. It was decided to open a Western Front on the west coast of Normandy in northern France. The Normandy Landing, D-Day, was a joint United States-British-Canadian operation under the command of General Dwight Eisenhower. This was the beginning of the final phase of the war. The new front allowed to attack the Third Reich from the west. The USSR, supported by the US, was making progress on the Eastern Front. Hitler's exhausted troops could no longer withstand such pressure. At the end of the year, the Ardennes offensive took place, resulting in total deoccupation of Belgium and Luxembourg. In the next year, the East and West fronts began to oppress the borders of Germany. The USSR invaded Poland, Romania, and Hungary. There remained only 80 kilometers from the border of Poland to the capital of the Third Reich. When the Soviet Red Army took Berlin, the United States and British forces were 60 kilometers away. After the Battle of Berlin, Hitler committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin, after which the German army surrendered. However, another issue had to be addressed in order to end the war. Japan refused to surrender, even after the surrender of its allies Italy and the Third Reich. Japan had an incredible manpower advantage. The assault on the island could have resulted in unbelievable losses among American soldiers. It should be mentioned that American society still wanted revenge for Pearl Harbor. In July 1945, the US tested a new type of nuclear weapon. Congress and the new President Truman decide to avoid a direct attack on Japan, and within 3 days, B-29 planes dropped nuclear bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The cities were completely destroyed, and from 130,000 to 160,000 Japanese died instantly. The lack of information about the number of such bombs in the US forced Emperor Hirohito and Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki to sign the capitulation papers. This is how the Second World War ended. The US became the world's leading country and a founding member of the UN. The US initiated the development of the Marshall Plan to rebuild devastated Europe. During the war, from 300 to 400,000 Americans were killed in the battlefield. After the end of World War II, a new conflict emerged between yesterday's allies. With the end of the Third Reich, the Soviet Union not only began to spread communism, but actually avoided payments for Lend-Lease. The political situation on the international scene was complicated by President Truman's tougher stance towards the USSR. The Korean question was considered by the previous head of the White House, Roosevelt, who agreed with Stalin to patronage Korea after the war. Having gained independence from Japan, the Soviet Union and the United States had to learn how to govern countries. In fact, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel into two states. In North Korea, a communist party was being formed under the leadership of Kim Il-sung. Contrary to this, a pro-American regime was formed in the South, led by the first president, Syngman Rhee. However, North Korea, which was financed and supported by China and the Soviet Union, started a war. The South Offensive was very successful, with North Korean troops capturing the cities of Incheon and Seoul. When the situation became critical, UN troops intervened, led by American General Douglas MacArthur. The Allies pushed North Korean troops back to the borders. In addition to training Korean soldiers, the USSR was sending more and more of its pilots to North Korea, fighting under Korean names. For the first time, jets were used in the sky over Korea. The enraged Douglas MacArthur demanded from the president to establish a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union. However, the existence of the USSR's nuclear weapons already ruled out this possibility, so President Truman had no choice but to dismiss MacArthur. As a result, President Truman's ratings have plummeted in the US. For about 2 years, the situation has changed little in either the military or the political sphere. Only the death of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin hastened the decision. In total, the war took about 36,000 American soldiers. More than 100 were wounded or maimed. The next major military conflict for the United States became the Second Indochina or Vietnam War. This war has already been bothering 4 US presidents. The war in Asia has been going on for some time. However, the fact that the USSR started to support North Vietnam and general dissatisfaction within the USA with the spread of communism forced President Eisenhower to join the conflict. In the early years, US intervention was limited to military instructors and advisors. The first regular army troops arrived only during the reign of John Kennedy. Unlike Korea, Vietnam considered itself the single state and was against division. Also, the Pentagon made a fatal mistake and underestimated the situation. Instead of a battle between 2 regular armies, American soldiers faced a whole country of partisans. North Vietnam was supported by the USSR and China and had a decent supply of ammunition, weapons, and provisions. Realizing that the war was lost, the American troops were formally withdrawn from Vietnam during the rule of President Gerald Ford. The U.S. Army officially lost 58,000 people, and the war cost an incredible $352 billion. This defeat is still considered the most shameful one the U.S. has ever suffered. If you want to know more about the war in Vietnam, our channel already has a detailed video. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. Vietnam has become the taught lesson for the world about what wars can actually do. However, as early as the 1990s, Iraq established its aggression against Saudi Arabia, destroying its oil infrastructure. As a result, the U.S., led by President George H.W. Bush and 34 other countries, launched a war in the Persian Gulf against Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Operation Desert Storm began from a massive air attack against Iraq, followed by a land operation. Only a month later, Iraq was forced to sign a truce, after which American forces and its allies withdrew soldiers from the Iraqi border. The American army suffered 300 casualties. This war was not nearly as bloody as the previous ones because it was mainly economic. The question of the cost of oil has been solving. 10 years later, the Middle East has given another cause for military conflict. Al-Qaeda's terrorist attack took place on hijacked planes aimed at the Twin Towers, World Trade Center, in New York, as well as at the Pentagon. This caused a real public outcry. President George W. Bush declared war on the Taliban and its ally Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden. In November 2001, the bombing of Afghanistan began. A month later, Kabul was seized, but it would take the US 10 years to eliminate bin Laden from Pakistan. The war against terrorism continued until 2021, when US President Joe Biden announced the complete withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. The Taliban took advantage of this and seized power in August 2021. Along with Afghanistan, the US, led by President George W. Bush, and Britain, with Prime Minister Tony Blair and their allies, declared war against terrorism in Iraq and against Saddam Hussein's regime. Iraq threatened the national security of the US and its allies. The cause of the war was Iraq's close ties with terrorist organizations, particularly Al-Qaeda, and the development and possession of chemical weapons of mass destruction. Despite the fact that the UN Security Council questioned the intention of the war, Operation Iraqi Liberation was launched, which was then replaced by the name Operation Iraqi Freedom. The main operation ended in the first month with the capture of Baghdad. At the end of the year, Saddam Hussein was arrested. After being imprisoned in a US base, he was handed over to the Iraqi authorities. After 3 years of investigation, the Iraqi court found Hussein guilty of many crimes and executed him. The arrest of a dictator was an important step in the fight against terrorism, but not a victory in war. Those people loyal to Hussein who lost their authority continued to support Al-Qaeda, which organized terrorist attacks against both coalition forces and civilians. The situation was exacerbated by the civil war between the Sunnis and Shiites. It was only in the late 2000s that British Prime Minister Gordon Brown and US President Barack Obama announced the end of the war against terrorism and the withdrawal of troops from Iraq. The last US troops left Iraq only in the early 2010s. The war ended. The US lost more than 4,000 soldiers. More than 30,000 were injured or maimed. According to various estimates, 76,000 to 107,000 Iraqi civilians were killed during the war. Another 120,000 to 147,000 were injured or maimed. The US national budget lost $805 billion during the war, and total coalition spending exceeded $2 trillion. After every war, the Pentagon gained new experience. At the moment, the US, as the head of the NATO military bloc, spends considerable funds from the budget on the Army. The staff troops is about 1.3 million. The United States has at its disposal advanced technologies, including a nuclear triad. States have global influence on different continents and have a significant impact on world peace.